A real Richie Rich type, huh? Yeah. Some big shot lawyer named Warren Symington, I snorted. I guess a lawyer makes more than a private security goon, even though I was pulling down 6 figures a year. Tabby's mouth had dropped open at that. Warren Symington? She exclaimed. I faced off against that a-hole a few months back with another client. He's the assistant DA for the city of Los Angeles. Small world, I chuckled. Like I said, I feel sorry for him if Cindy finds another guy who makes more than he does. She snorted in response. As far as I'm concerned, he deserves it if she takes him for every dime. I just shrugged. Well, it would teach him a lesson about gold diggers. She really didn't ask for shit when she filed? Nope. She just said she wanted out. No division of assets, no alimony, no kids, so no child support. Just out. I believe she had literal dollar signs in her eyes when the judge gave us the quickie D, and she was free to marry her one true love, I said with a wry smile. Well, if she's looking for a good reason to dump him, he's a lecherous a-hole. He hits on every woman with a hole and a heartbeat. The man is 50 years old, but acts like a teenager when it comes to women. Sometimes, I get the feeling that the heartbeat would be optional with him. Okay, that's kind of sick, I said, and couldn't help laughing. Do you really think he would crack open a cold one? Ew! She made a disgusted face. I wouldn't put it past him, though. He hit on Judge Sherman once. That would should be retired by now, since I think she's pushing 90. I laughed. Are you sure she's that old? Okay, she's probably around 60, but she looks 90. Still, that's kind of sick, I acknowledged. Yeah, well, Warren is a horn dog, so I think your ex would want to know if he's messing around on her. I'm not worried about it. It's her life. If she finds out and takes him to the cleaners, more power to her, I shrugged. Tabby laughed at that. You really are pretty laid back, aren't you? On most things, yeah. If I dwelled on bad stuff, I'd go crazy. So I just take it in stride and do what I have to do. That's cool. I mean, really cool. I like that in a man, she said, slipping her hand over to mine and giving it a squeeze. I looked into her beautiful eyes and we shared another smile. Tabby is a strong woman, but doesn't let her strength translate into cruelty. I admire and respect that about her. She just doesn't put up with bullshit from anybody, as evidenced by how she'd stood up to Gordon and then stood up for William alongside me. You aren't like most lawyers I've met, Tabby. You actually have a good heart, I said as we gazed into each other's eyes. Thank you, Han, she said with her beautiful smile. I try to see the goodness in people, but it's hard to do when I sometimes have to work with the worst that society has to offer. I know that feeling too, I said. Working for Red River, it was pretty easy to spot the a-holes who were there just for the violence. I've run into guys like Gordon. Most of them weren't cowards like he is, though. At least they got their own hands dirty. I know it isn't much to respect someone for, but guys like Gordon who hide behind hired goons, even though he says he doesn't, are pathetic. Pathetic, she said with a snort. That's a good way to describe him. The calls he made to me to get him out of trouble were filled with fear whenever he'd get put in a holding cell with some real baddest hard cases, she said with a chuckle. I chuckled along with her. We spent another 20 minutes talking, then called for the check. After I paid the bill, we left out and I dropped her at her car. We kissed, and then I followed her back to William's place. When we got there, William and the ladies were just returning from their errands. Shelley had gone with him, while Maggie had gone and filed the restraining and no-contact orders with the court, as well as filing the divorce paperwork. They were still coaching him on what to do in preparation for the upcoming battle. He had removed his wife from his insurance and medical plans and named his children as sole beneficiaries of his life insurance policy. He had also gone to the hospital and had them take a DNA sample to see if the kids were actually his. Their DNA was already on file from when they were born. It would only take a few days to compare the sample he gave to their records and get him the results. Wow, I think I was lucky that my divorce wasn't this bad, I said with a wry smile as they wrapped up the latest coaching session. When I told Maggie and Shelley how amicable it had been, they laughed and told me that I had to be the luckiest man alive. As far as divorces went, well, hopefully I won't have to go through an all-out war like William here, I smiled. I'm going to stick this one out, though. I have the feeling you're going to need my help at some point. I have a bad feeling about this whole mess. I hope you're wrong on that, but we'll take all the help we can get, Maggie said with a smile. You've already provided some great evidence against Mrs. Turner with that recording. I got it logged into evidence for the upcoming court hearings and made copies while I was at it. So saying, she handed me a copy on a different SD card and handed one to William and Tabby as well. There, just in case something happens to the original. After the crap Gordon has pulled in the past, I wouldn't put it past him this time to try and tamper with evidence on that witch's behalf. Would he really do that? William asked. You stood up to him, William, Tabby said. Bullies like him don't like it when their victims stand up to them and stop being a victim. Right now, he's facing some serious jail time. You and Deck will probably be subpoenaed to testify against him on the assault and trespassing charges. William looked at me, and I nodded that I was with him on this. He looked at Tabby. I'm not scared of him anymore, and I'll testify against him if it puts him away. Then he turned and looked at me. I have a week to go before I can pick up the Smith & Wesson .38 I bought while I was out earlier. I've also applied for a concealed weapons permit. I nodded. I should have thought of that, but I heard they're notoriously hard to get here in California. That William had taken the initiative on that showed that he was thinking for himself too. Good. That way, you won't be unprotected while you're out of the house. I smiled my respect for him. I have one question though. What's that? He asked. If the kids aren't yours, will you still sue for custody? I asked. I had to get a sense of where he was. He sighed. Yes, I will. If it comes to that, and my children have a different biological father, I'll also sue Candace and whomever their birth father would be for fraud and back child support, since I was led to believe that they were mine. If they are my children, which I believe they are, I won't sue anyone and won't care about child support from Candace. But either way, I love my children, whether of my own flesh and blood or not. Sounds like a plan to me, I shrugged. He'd been the kids' father for all of their young lives and loved his kids dearly. I saw the determination on his face and hoped that one day I'd be a father too. Cindy had been on birth control during our entire relationship, and back then, it had suited me just fine. Now, however, so what's next? William asked Maggie, breaking me from my reverie. I think that's pretty much all you can do for now, William, she responded. You will probably be notified of their court date, and we will notify you if they get out of jail on bond or bail. Until then, we have the restraining and no contact orders in place to be reviewed after your initial divorce hearing. I'll be working to get them made permanent, but you will need to not contact either Gordon or Candace at all. If you do, those orders will most likely be voided by the judge. I understand, he nodded. I've never been one to gloat, and I have you all to thank for getting me out of this mess. So saying, he stood and shook hands with all of us. Don't thank us yet though, William, Tabby said. There are still a lot of things that might go wrong, and then there's the possible danger to your life from Gordon. We can't prove anything yet, but with his threats against your life, we're going to have to keep a close watch on you and your children. That will be Deck's job. That's what I'm here for, all right, I smiled. Then I lost the smile as I laid it all out for him. William, I'm not going to lie to you. This could get dangerous for you and your children. Even with the restraining order in effect, it's just a piece of paper. You can't pick up your gun for a week, and that's only going to increase your security a little bit. As long as you know how to use it effectively, it should provide a good defense for your home. If you get the concealed carry license, that will help you outside the home too. But until then, if you have any problems with what you think might be an intruder on the premises or someone following you, you call me right after you call 911. Got it? I'd worked enough bodyguard gigs to know that protecting a client is always a risky proposition. Anytime some lunatic threatened violence, I would have to take everything into account. In this case, our opponents were known to me, but it would be sketchy if Gordon hired some goons to kill William. As much of a coward as he was, and as much as he hated being beaten, I'd have to protect him as best I could, not to mention watch my own back in the process. I was also worried about Tabby. Sure, she could hold her own, and had a spine of titanium, but she was still human like the rest of us. I hoped that Gordon wouldn't be that stupid, but you never can tell with some a-holes. I get it, he said with a nod of understanding. God bless him, he was taking it all in stride. My first impression of him was correct. The heart of a lion. Too bad his stature didn't reflect that. I wondered, not for the first time, how he'd ended up kowtowing to Candace for the years they'd been married. My only conclusion was that he'd loved her completely. She didn't love him anymore, if she ever did, though. That much was apparent by the way she'd been treating him in the last year or so. My best guess on that was that she'd lost all respect for him because he gave her whatever she had wanted with no fight or argument. By the time he put his foot down, it was too late, and she had turned into a harpy from hell. It didn't help William that she'd also taken a lover who could beat William into a pulp if she had told him to. So here I was, the equalizer in this whole mess. My job was simple on paper: protect William Turner and help him in any way possible until this situation was resolved. My job was complicated in practice: protect William Turner from an unstable sociopathic a-hole and a seemingly unstable sociopathic soon-to-be ex-wife. Add to that the fact that the unstable sociopathic a-hole's former attorney was now helping his rival, and shit got even more complicated. He might go after her as a sort of revenge for firing him and changing sides. This was going to suck. After getting Plan D hashed out with my cohorts, and praying that this one wouldn't get waylaid by circumstances beyond our control, Mr. Murphy, I left and went back to my apartment. I showered and turned on the TV to the news. I was mildly surprised to see that the story in progress was about Gordon Smith and his latest arrest. The feed was live for the interview portion of the spot, and I recognized William's house. When it panned to the front door, William was on the porch with Maggie beside him and Shelley on the other side of Maggie. Maggie was the one answering the questions. "Mr. Turner doesn't have any comment on that at this time," she said. "As to his bodyguard, he isn't needed right now due to the fact that Mr. Smith and Mrs. Turner are currently incarcerated." Next question? "Yes, how did Mr. Turner end up in a cuck and the hot wife relationship?" the a-hole reporter asked. This time, William stepped forward. "Listen up. I was not a willing participant, and I am currently in the process of divorcing my soon-to-be ex-wife. Mr. Smith is listed as the correspondent in the case, and I, for one, will not be slandered by the likes of you. This interview is over." So saying, he turned and was followed into his house by Shelley and Maggie, and the door slammed and was locked in the a-hole reporter's face even as he tried to ask another asinine question. I couldn't help the grin that spread across my face. William made me proud to know him in that moment. He didn't take any shit and made his position known to the broadcast journalists, or as I like to call them, TV idiots. The TV idiot who had asked the dumbass question tried to cover his own, but as he told the home audience that he was surprised by Mr. Turner's hostility, I just shook my head at the a-hole and flipped over to another channel. Hell, William had been anything but hostile. He'd given his last statement to the TV idiot in a level tone of voice, so the idiot came off looking like a total idiot. Reminded me of one of the Today Show anchors asking stupid questions about classified operations that she had to know the brass couldn't answer during the early days of the War on Terror. Each time a general said, "I can't talk about that," the TV idiot in question would then ask another stupid question about classified ops. Yep, gotta love TV idiots. Taking it slow with Tabby turned out to be harder than I thought. No pun intended. During that first week, we went out to lunch or dinner every day until the next Wednesday, when we got word that Gordon made bail and had posted bail for Candace, too. That put a damper on our mood that night at dinner, which had gotten increasingly romantic as we danced a bit and kissed on the dance floor during slow numbers. We bunkered down when that happened. I got to meet Tara and Kevin, William's kids, for the first time when I moved into their house for a couple of days. I was given the guest room for the duration of my stay. Kevin was impressed when I told him that I was his dad's bodyguard, but Tara couldn't care less. She was too busy texting her friends to really worry about her father's safety. Kids, gotta love him. Kevin was 11, and Tara was 14. She was your typical teenage girl. Kevin was your typical preteen boy. At least typical from what I'd seen of other kids their age. They at least respected their father, and surprisingly took their parents' separation in stride. William told them that their mom wouldn't be around for a while, and he wasn't sure when she would be home. He left it at that, refusing to say anything bad about their mother to his children. The man has class. The next day, the results arrived from the DNA test. Maggie, Shelley, Tabby, and I were all there when he opened the envelope. The tension was thick enough to cut with a knife. William stared at the envelope in his hands for what felt like half an hour. He looked up at each of us in turn, and finally tore the corner off and opened it. He pulled out the paper and unfolded it as if he was reading his own death warrant. His face remained blank while he read the whole thing twice. I was hoping that the results would show that he was the father, but I was expecting the opposite. The tension got even thicker as he read it a third time. Nobody said a word. I think we were all holding our breath while he read it yet again. His expression gave nothing away, and I was beginning to think that my expectation of the worst was going to win out over my hope for the best. Finally, he looked up and at each of us in turn. His face broke into a grin as he said, "They're mine. Both of my kids are mine." Maggie squealed in glee. Shelley laughed to release her tension, while Tabby and I both just sighed in relief, letting out laughs as we did so. "Congratulations, Han," Maggie and Shelley said, pretty much in unison. They both hugged William, then Tabby moved in and hugged him too. I shook his hand, then pulled him into a back-pounding hug. "I'm happy that it worked out for you, man," I said sincerely. "Yes, definitely. Thank God. Thank you all. I had to know for sure, especially after that talk we had and the fact that Candace was so brazen about the whole thing." He laughed in relief as well. "Don't worry about that, William. I do need to make a copy of that for the custody portion of the divorce, though. I wouldn't put it past your wife to try and bring your paternity and parental rights into question, Maggie said. Of course, he nodded, handing the form over to Maggie with a smile. At least now, she can't claim that you aren't the father. I won't lie to you, William. The mothers in divorce cases get primary custody of the children 95% of the time, no matter the circumstances that cause the divorce. That's including cases where the husband is the cheater, and cases where the couple divorce for reasons other than infidelity, Maggie said. No, unacceptable. I want full custody. Anything less, and she's already made her intent clear to take my children and run. William had a look of steely determination on his face. Maggie nodded again. I understand that, and her recorded confession to that effect should go a long way toward getting primary custody for you. It will depend on which judge we get, though. Before we even get to the custody portion, I will offer supervised visitation for Candace, an olive branch, but one where she will never be alone with the children. I've already submitted a petition to have the orders of protection against Gordon Smith made permanent due to his history of violence. Maggie, I said, orders of protection are all well and good, but like I've said before, they're just pieces of paper. And if our theory about Gordon hiring outside muscle to do his dirty work for him is accurate, he won't need to come anywhere near William in order to try something. Isn't that why you're here? She smirked. For the moment, yes. Granted, the gun should help, and there's only 24 hours left on the hold before he can pick it up. William spoke up. So, am I going to have to look over my shoulder for the rest of my life because of Gordon? Not ideally, no. Gordon has shown that he holds a grudge, though, I said. I'm going over a worst-case scenario here. If he decides that he has to have revenge and hires some hitters to do it, you are going to have to get very good with that pistol. I'll go with you to the range and give you a course on it if you need one. You said you've done some shooting before, so you might be okay. The thing is, paper targets and a-holes trying to kill you are two different things entirely. I'm not a killer, Deck, he said, shaking his head. I'm not telling you to kill anyone, William. What I am telling you is that you might very well need to defend yourself and your family. I'll be moving out tomorrow after you pick up your weapon, so it's going to be on you to defend yourself and your children when I can't be here. He listened and thought about what I just said. What's it like? He asked softly. Killing someone. I mean, how did I answer that? I thought for a moment, then settled for the truth. It's different for everyone, and some people actually enjoy it. For me, the first time I had to take another life, I puked my guts out after the battle was over. Then Captain Drake told me something that helped quite a bit. He said, they have no fathers or mothers, no sons or daughters, no sisters or brothers, no wives or lovers. They aren't human. They're the enemy. That right there helped me out if I took his philosophical outlook and compartmentalized the enemy as less than human. It might sound cruel, but it's how I kept my sanity over there. I didn't know the enemy personally, though. You know Gordon Smith, even if he's a dickhead. I hope you don't have to kill him, but if you do, he is the enemy. As I was reciting that, Tabby took my hand in hers and gave me a squeeze to show her support. I squeezed back in thanks. William was mulling over what I'd said and finally looked up with a smile. Then he's the enemy, and I'll do what I have to do to protect my children and myself. Good man, I said with a nod of respect. When a man, even a mild-mannered man like William, has his family threatened, he can turn into a lion to defend them. As far as Candace and Gordon went, they now posed a clear and present danger, as far as I was concerned. Candace might try to kidnap her own kids, while Gordon might go completely ballistic and try to kill them, and William too. Granted, we had no proof that he had hired a hitman to kill his previous rival, but we couldn't take anything for granted. Tabby herself had told me how unstable the a-hole is, and how it had been getting progressively worse over last several years since he'd hired her as his attorney. Well, that little meeting ended with the kids getting home from school. Kevin was now my bud, as he thought I was cool because I'd been a soldier. Tara was starting to warm up to me, too. I let them both know that I would only be staying one more night, but I was never more than a phone call away, and would be here off and on until the whole thing was over. They took it well. Then William came clean with his children about the reasons why their mother and father were not living together anymore. Tara and Kevin were both surprised, to say the least. But then Kevin said something that shocked the shit out of all of us. Is that the guy who was doing bad things to Mommy a few weeks ago? He asked. That got everyone's attention and instilled the previously stated shock. Kev, what do you mean by bad things, son? William asked, having recovered from his son's statement before anyone else. I saw them in your bed and he was making her scream. I know I was supposed to be at school. I wasn't feeling good, but the school nurse couldn't get a hold of Mom to come get me, so I walked home. When I got here, This big boy was on top of mommy and she was screaming. I was so scared I ran out of the house and back to school. When Kevin finished saying that, William looked like he was about to go find Gordon and his soon-to-be ex and kill them himself. Son, did you get a good look at the man's face? Yeah, but I was so scared. I'm sorry, Dad. I should have told you before, but when I came home later and mommy was okay, I just thought I'd imagine the whole thing, Kevin finished. It's okay, son. That was the day that your mother told me that you weren't feeling well, and you were already in bed by the time I got home, right? William asked. Kevin just nodded. Tara just stood there with her mouth hanging open while her little brother related the events of that day. Then she accused him of making it all up. No, sweetie, he isn't making it up, William told his daughter. When she heard that, she went paler than a ghost. Then she went running and screaming to her room. I'll go talk to her, Shelley volunteered. She went chasing after Tara to try and do some damage control. It had just become a whole new ballgame, folks. Maggie, as it turns out, is really good with kids. So is Shelley, for that matter. Maggie, as gently as humanly possible, interviewed Kevin and recorded his account of what had happened that day. As she was wrapping up the interview, Shelley and Tara came back into the living room and Tara just smiled apologetically, then ran and hugged her father tightly. I'm so sorry, Daddy, she sobbed. I had no idea that Mom was like that. Then she looked at her brother. I'm sorry I accused you of lying, shithead. I had to chuckle at that. Brothers and sisters will always fight while growing up. It's human nature. Even when apologizing, she still had to insult him. It reminded me of growing up with Kara as my sister, so I had to grin at the memory. It's okay, sweetie, but don't call your brother names, William said in a stern voice, even as he hugged his daughter. Sorry, she mumbled. Then she actually hugged her brother, and they shared a different sibling emotion together. Compassion. Most times, blood will win out, and you love your family, even if you sometimes hate them too. Things started to move quickly after that. With the new recorded testimony from Kevin as to what his mother had been doing with Gordon Smith, and then picking him out of a photo lineup, the judge in charge of the divorce, a Judge Reinhold, no relation, found in favor of William having primary custody, at least until the final settlement came down. That is, it seems that while the judge was a bit of a bleeding heart, he was also a father himself. So he understood. That was just the preliminary ruling, however. The final settlement, including custody, was still debatable. It all depended on how the rest of the case went. Maggie gave her argument to the judge about how Mrs. Turner had shown a pattern of disrespect, not only to her husband, but to her own children as well. She had also put her children in danger by being unreachable in case of an emergency. She was, after all, their primary contact for coming to get the kids in case of an illness at school or any other issues that may arise. I studied Candace's stature and what I could see of her face from my vantage point over on William's side and in the bench behind the plaintiff's table. She had first a look of shock, then one of profound shame and guilt, as she realized that her little boy had witnessed her affair firsthand. When I looked at Gordon, sitting beside her, his look was one of smug satisfaction. He still believed that he was going to skate away scot-free. His new attorney was a great white shark, and unlike Tabby and the girls, wasn't hampered by anything as trivial as a conscience. The only members of our team in court that day were Maggie and me. Tabby had to get an order of protection and no contact against Gordon as well, since he'd called her up one night while we were on a date. She'd put him on speaker, and I'd listened to him making some very thinly veiled threats against her. You know the kind. It would be a shame if... fill in the blank. She finally told him that she wasn't intimidated and hung up on him. She then blocked his number and called Maggie and Shelley and told them to do the same. When she reported what he'd done, with her smartphone's recording feature and my testimony backing her up, the judge was more than happy to grant permanent orders of protection and no contact against old Gordy. When we walked out of the courtroom, I took Tabby's hand. Sweetheart, why not stay at my place for a while? You think he would try to get me at my place? She asked. Well, that, and I think we've moved slow enough. If you don't mind, I'd like to speed things up a little. I smiled and kissed her. I like that idea. I've been wanting you since the night after you rescued me from that a-hole. We had been dating and spending a lot of time together for almost 2 months, since that fateful day when I'd gone to run that surveillance op on Gordy Boy and had ended up flattening him. Good. We'll stop by your place on the way, and you can pick up some clothes and other necessities. I smiled even wider. With what William was paying me for retainer and on-call protection services as needed, I was making some damn good money. He'd already paid me $100K, surprising me with his rationale that I'd already saved his bacon once, and would do it again if the need ever arose. For the a-hole's and soon-to-be ex-wife's part in this little play, They'd kept away from us except in the courtroom. All contact was through lawyers, and even with Candace and her shark fighting tooth and nail, the divorce was still proceeding, albeit slower than we would have liked. As we drove over to her place, I reviewed what had happened since the initial hearing. Candace and Gordon had pled out on the trespassing and assault charges and got community service for the lesser charges they'd opted for. With Gordy's insanely high-priced shark, the sentence was the minimum for what he'd pled to, as well. We found out that Gordy was bankrolling Candace's shark too. Trust fund babies. Gotta love him, right? No, good, because I was being sarcastic anyway. For some odd reason, Candace seemed to want to stay married to William. Her lawyer was now lobbying for marriage counseling, which Maggie was fighting tooth and nail, arguing that William had no need or desire for marriage counseling, as his mind was already made up. Judge Reinhold, still no relation, felt the same way. He even chastised Candace's shark by saying, "If my wife had done to me what Mrs. Turner has done to her husband, I wouldn't want to go through counseling either." By the time we got to Tabby's apartment, the electricity between us was palpable. We went inside for her to pack up a suitcase and overnight bag. I was going to help, but as soon as we got into her bedroom, she turned and threw her arms around my neck, pulling me into a soul-blistering kiss. I returned her kiss with interest, our tongues dueling and dancing together as we nearly ripped the clothes from each other's body. "I need you, Deck," she whispered as I kissed her long, lovely neck and laid her down on the bed. "I need you too," I whispered back into her ear as I lowered my lips to her neck again. We had wild sex. Once done, our bodies were soaked with sweat, and it glistened erotically on her ebony skin. I drew back and looked down at her smiling face and heaving chest as I moved off to her side. She stroked my face, and I leaned in and kissed her lovingly. No words could be spoken in that moment. All of our actions would have to speak in place of our vocal cords, at least for a while. "Why don't you move in here, baby?" Tabby asked after we'd showered, made love again, and showered a second time. She had just finished packing an overnight bag and suitcase with some clothes she would need for her stay at my place. "After this is all over, I will, if you still want me to," I smiled. "I live closer to William than you do, so it would be easier and faster for me to get to his place from mine if I have to. Practical." "I like that," she grinned and leaned over to kiss me. "Enough of that, sweetheart. Otherwise, we won't get to my place tonight." I chuckled once we'd broken the kiss. "Fair enough, but once we get there..." She left it hanging with a wink, leaving the rest to my imagination. I grinned as we finished packing everything up and took it all out to her car. She followed me back to my place, but while she was unpacking, William called me up. "Hey, William, what's up, man?" I asked as I answered my phone. "Someone is here," he said in an urgent whisper. "I have my kids with me, and I already called 911. "Where are you, in the house?" I asked immediately. "In my bedroom. The door is locked, and I have my pistol ready." "Good. Stay there, and I'll be there ASAP." Tabby's eyes were wide as she realized what was going on. I ended the call and looked at her. "I have to go, beautiful. Be careful, baby," she said. With a quick kiss, I was out the door at a dead sprint in my car and driving like a bat out of hell over to William's place. I actually beat the cops to the house. There was a Hummer H3 parked out front, and I couldn't help the derisive snort as I saw it. The Humvee is one of the greatest off-road vehicles ever made. The U.S. military uses them for pretty much everything a light vehicle can be used for, from light patrol vehicles to ambulances. The civilian version is a pimped-out, overpriced travesty that was somewhat of a status symbol to the rich and brain-dead. As I neared the house itself, I could hear crashing sounds coming from inside. We'd gone over this contingency, and I really hoped that William and the kids were bunkered down and safe. I decided to go for the WTF factor and knocked on the door. When I knocked, things got really quiet inside, and I heard someone's footsteps approaching the door itself. I saw the peephole go dark as I waited off to the side where he wouldn't be able to see me. Someone, probably an a-hole, was looking through the peephole. I reached over and rang the doorbell just to let him know that someone was still there. Then I heard the idiots talking. "Who is it?" "Don't know." "Cops." "Nah." Cops announced themselves. "Some punk kid ringing and running then." "Yeah, probably." From the voices, there were only two of them. Not good odds for the morons. Screw it. Find the guy and kids and do what we came to do. He's in the master bedroom. He has to be. Chances are, the kids are with him. With that exchange, the footsteps moved away from the door. I rang the bell again. "What the hell?" came the exasperated reply as I hit the bell several more times. When I saw the lights and heard the sirens, I slipped around to the back of the house as quickly and quietly as I could. When I got to the back, I noticed that the glass had been busted out of the sliding patio door. Two men, most probably armed with guns. Not good. I'd seen through the patio door that the entire inside of the house was a wreck. They had been destroying anything and everything they could find. William was in there with the .38 for backup. He had done exactly what we'd planned, and I was proud of him. I could see through the bedroom window that he had the bed between him and the door and was kneeling behind the bed. The pistol was steady in his hands as he aimed it in the classic Weaver grip I'd taught him. The kids would be safe in the large bathtub in the master bathroom, out of the line of fire. Then I heard the banging on the front door and the announcement, "Police! Open up!" Shit, it's the cops. We gotta get out of here. Sure enough, the two goons came barreling out the back door and I jumped up and slammed the second one into the wall. His partner didn't even slow down as he kept running and jumped the fence as I dealt with his butt buddy. He was stunned from hitting his head on the wall. So I grabbed the gun from his belt before he could draw it. I then dragged him off to the side where the cops wouldn't see us if they looked out the back door. "Who do you work for?" I asked in a low growl as I placed the barrel of the Colt Python under his chin. "If I tell you, he'll kill me," he said, terrified. "Be smart. Think about it. I'm the one with the gun. He isn't here. Now, are you going to tell me or not?" I asked as I pressed the barrel a bit harder into the soft spot under his jawbone. He gulped, then nodded reluctantly. "Gordon Smith hired me." "That's what I thought. Now, this is what's going to happen. You will tell the cops the truth about who hired you, and you will leave me out of this. You tripped and fell, and that's what knocked you out. Oh, and you shouldn't worry about old Gordy boy. Worry about me. I'm a lot more dangerous than he is." So saying, I hit him on the point of his chin with the butt of the pistol, then dropped him and wiped the gun clean of my prints before placing it in his hand. As the cops entered the house, I exited silently out the side gate, then made my way back to my car. I watched for about 5 minutes, and when the ambulance got there for the dipshit, I watched as they wheeled him out on a gurney, his wrist cuffed to it. He had regained consciousness and was giving his confession to the detective who had just arrived. I smiled grimly. Gordy boy's life was about to get a lot more difficult. As I got back to my apartment, my cell rang with William's number. "Hey boss," I said. "I assume that was you who dealt with the a-hole that didn't escape," he said with a chuckle. "I can't confirm or deny that, boss man." I chuckled back, causing him to laugh heartily. "Well," he rolled over on his boss, "and you can probably guess who that is." "My guess would be Gordy boy," I responded with a grin as I walked up to my apartment door. "Good guess, but why do I have the feeling that you already knew that?" "Well, because I enjoyed getting him to talk, then knocking him out. I wonder how far his partner got before he realized his a-hole buddy wasn't with him." "Well, the cops picked him up too, once they realized that the Hummer out front was theirs. They waited for him to come back and grabbed him as soon as he got inside. He had a gun on him, so they got him for possession of an unregistered firearm. The cops are still poking around, so I have to go." "I understand, and don't mention that I was there, please," I said, unnecessarily as it turned out. "Give me a little credit, Deck," he snorted. "I'll talk to you later." "Okay, later, boss." I laughed quietly as I opened the door to my apartment and was damn near tackled by a very nubile Nubian beauty. "Are you okay, baby? You didn't get hurt, did you?" she asked in rapid succession. "I'm fine, sweetheart. The cops got the two a-holes who broke into William's house, and I now have confirmation that Gordy hires outside help." "Shit, I knew it," she exclaimed with a shake of her head. "We were right," I responded, nodding in confirmation. Now there wasn't much to do except wait for the cops to take old Gordy into custody. Unfortunately, that didn't work out so well. Gordon must have been tipped off somehow and disappeared before the cops could apprehend him. I don't mean that he just ran. He went off the grid so quick, it was like he never existed. Except for the APB and arrest warrants out on him. Unstable or not, he was one cunning son of a witch. In spite of APBs being issued, and his name and face all over the news, Gordon Smith had disappeared so thoroughly. The cops were left holding their dicks in their hands when they'd raided his Beverly Hills home and found him gone already. If I had to venture a guess, it had to be the one that got away temporarily. He probably called or texted Gordon to tell him that the op against Turner had been blown. Gordon probably started packing as soon as he heard that his hired goons had been captured. Hell, it had been all over the 11 o'clock news, due to the a-holes being linked to him. One of the cops must have leaked the info to the press that the goons in question had been working for Gordon. Goddamn LAPD. They have a long history of stupidity. In case you don't remember the Rodney King beating and the botched OJ investigation, planting evidence? Seriously? But then, compared to those two incidents, this was just a minor hiccup for LA's finest. 2 weeks after that fateful night, Gordy Boy was still in the wind. Nobody seemed to be able to find a 6 feet 3 inches, 230 pounds, Royd K. sociopathic a-hole with blonde hair and blue eyes, who looked a bit like Chris Hemsworth and whose picture was plastered all over the news. Like I said, LA's finest. Okay, so the LAPD had done one thing right in this whole shebang. They had Gordy's accounts frozen, so he couldn't pull any additional cash out. With limited resources, it was just a matter of time before they caught him. Tabby had some friends in the LAPD, so she was able to get the skinny on what they were doing and where they thought he might be. The most popular theory was that he hightailed it for Mexico, where he could live like a king on the $50K he'd taken out of his account. That was the only transaction they could find, the day of the botched raid on William's house. Candace, of course, denied all knowledge that it was going to happen and was shocked when she'd heard about it. Her shark still thought that they had a case to get her half of William's fortune, plus generous alimony. Even though the judge wasn't as liberal as we thought he'd be, he was still bound by the law in our no-fault state of California. Sure, he had some leeway, but not as much as he would have probably liked. At least we were able to get Candace's parents on our side. When we played the taped conversation with them and explained it, her father, Jake Sumner, was furious. Her mother, Melissa, just cried as she shook her head in disgust at her daughter's words and actions. "We didn't raise her that way," Jake said, shaking his head in dismay. "You have to believe me." We did believe him, as both he and his wife seemed to be genuinely nice people. They loved William and thought of him as the son they'd never had. Well, when Gordon's funding for Candace's shark dried up, he went into overdrive, pulling every sneaky legal trick in the book, and probably some that weren't in the book, to get the divorce prolonged, and even to try and get a different judge, one who would be more sympathetic to his client. He tried 3 times to get Judge Reinhold to recuse himself, but to no avail. Then he tried to throw a conflict or interest charge up for the judge to be forcibly removed. That also went nowhere, even though the judge had dated Shelley for about 3 months back when she was still in college and he was a prosecutor. That was also before he met and married his wife, so there was nothing scandalous going on. Also, since Shelley had no contact with him, and she wasn't even the attorney working on the divorce, the motion to have the judge removed from the case was groundless. Maggie drew up a new division of assets proposal for Candace, and I have to say William was far more generous than I would have been. But then, when I asked him about it, he explained it like this: "I just want her gone from my life. I'm sick and tired of that courtroom, not to mention that a-hole lawyer of hers." I had to agree with him on that one. So at the end, Candace, against the advice of her shark, took the deal that William offered. She was allowed to have 2 hours of supervised visitation every other weekend. Yeah, when the tape was played for the judge in his chambers, he absolutely refused to have her left alone with the children she had threatened to kidnap. Then when Kevin testified on the stand about what he'd witnessed that day, Candace paled and actually started crying. It was the most human thing I'd seen her do since I got drawn into the middle of this shitstorm. She was crying and apologizing to her son, daughter, and even William. I think she finally realized how far out in the ditch she was, as Dr. Phil would say. She was given $2,000 a month for alimony, payable for 3 years, or until she married again, whichever came first. The judge waived child support, since William was more than capable of providing for his kids. At the final hearing, Candace even apologized to William for the shit she'd put him through for the past year and a half. I thought poor William was going to die of shock, but he soldiered on and accepted her apology graciously. He was a better man than I would have been in that situation. I would have told her to go drill herself. No shame. I don't like cheaters, period. I also don't like it when someone forces someone else to accept an untenable situation. That was what Candace had done. William wasn't physically capable of fighting back against her former lover, so she used that and the threat of taking his kids to get him to kind of go along with the whole thing. Hell, he'd fought back the only way he could at the time. He hired some outside talent, me, to do what he was physically incapable of doing. Now, however, he could defend himself. For a bean counter, he's an evil shot with that Smith & Wesson. Yes, we'd gone to the range together, and he showed me his skills. The man had a tight shot group at 10 meters, both center mass and headshots. I was impressed, and so it went. As far as the final divorce gavel-banging William out of his crappy marriage to an insane harpy. Okay, maybe that's a bit harsh. She did show a little humanity at the end. William gave me a final check for $50K, plus a case of beer. Did I mention the fact that I like my former boss? He's a good guy. Gordon was still at large, but without his trust fund to draw from, it was just a matter of time before the cops caught up to him. Then again, this is the LAPD we're talking about. Tabby and I were seated with Maggie and Shelley. William and his kids were seated across from us in his living room. William had tried to hire Tabby as his new lawyer, but she said no. She was going to do something else, but Shelley would be a more than adequate substitute. That took her partners by surprise, not to mention yours truly. I was as shocked as the rest of them. Tabby leaned over to me after her announcement and whispered in my ear, "We'll talk about it later. I want to discuss it with you before I tell them." "Tell them what?" I whispered back. "Later, baby," she replied with a wink. Okay, now I was wondering what it could be. "Anyway," she continued, looking at our friends, "we need to get going. Deck and I have a lot to talk about." She was smiling when she said it, but now I was worried. She had turned down a lucrative position as William Turner's general attorney and wanted to discuss something with me before she told our friends anything about what she had planned. "We understand, Han," Shelley said and gave us both hugs. "Just let us know what's going on, okay?" "I will, I promise," Tabby replied, then gave William and Maggie hugs too. When Maggie hugged me, she whispered, "If Tabby wasn't my friend, I would try for you in a heartbeat." "Sorry, I'm in love with your friend, so I'm off limits," I whispered in reply. "Good to know," she said, then reached down and squeezed my butt. "Hey girl, enough of that. He's mine," Tabby said with a laugh. "Just checking the goods." Maggie winked at her friend with a grin. "Uh-huh. Likely story," Tabby said, rolling her eyes. "Okay, we need to go. See you all later." With that, we left out of there and drove to our place. Yes, I had convinced Tabby to move in with me, as my place was bigger. She insisted on redecorating, of course. Hey, she has good taste, so I couldn't complain. She cleaned up my bachelor pad, and I had to admit that it looked and smelled a lot better when she was done. I got her put on the lease, and she was paying half the rent now. "Okay, so what do we need to talk about, sweetheart?" I asked as we drove. "When we get home, baby. Trust me, it isn't anything bad." "I trust you, honey. I'm just curious," I smiled. It was true. I trusted her more than anyone else in my life, except for my aunt, uncle, and cousin. We were planning a trip up to Santa Barbara in a few months to visit them and introduce everyone. When Aunt Naomi had asked about a girlfriend, I'd admitted that I was seeing someone special and we were moving in together. She then demanded that I bring her up to meet them, and I had agreed. When I told Tabby about that, she readily agreed, saying she would love to meet my family. Unfortunately, her caseload was pretty heavy, and she couldn't afford to take a week off until a few months later. When we got inside the apartment and after a long and passionate kiss, I looked her in the eyes. "Okay, spill it. What do you want to talk about, baby girl?" "A business opportunity," she winked. "What you did for William is something that we could market." "What do you mean? Being a bodyguard?" "Been there, done that," I laughed. "Bodyguards don't do what you did for him. Sure, they protect him, but you taught him how to protect himself and his family. You went above and beyond what most bodyguards would do." "What did he keep calling you? His equalizer?" "I like that, and it sounds like you know what you're doing." I snorted at that. If it hadn't taken so long to get a plan together that actually worked, it would have gone a lot smoother in the beginning. "You couldn't have predicted what Gordon would do, baby. You improvised in every situation and ended up coming out on top." "True," I shrugged. "So what I propose is this. We market you as the equalizer. Kind of a bodyguard PI with extra services." "Now that sounds like I'd also be a paid escort," I chuckled. Okay. Then how about a bodyguard who goes above and beyond?" "We can work that out later, sweetheart," I chuckled. "I like the general idea, though." "Good. We can hash out the details after you take me to bed and have sex with me till I am senseless," she said in a very sultry voice. Who the hell was I to argue with that kind of logic? I grinned and took her in my arms, kissing her lovingly. Then I did what she asked me to do. With Tabby, I trusted her more than anyone else I'd been with, including Cindy. She had shown me a clean bill of health after she told me about her brush with the clap and how her ex had given it to her. It was only a precaution for both of us. The first time Tabby said, "I love you," to me was when we just finished watching a movie at her place. I responded with, "I love you, too," automatically, then realized that I meant every word. When she wasn't working and I wasn't guarding William, we spent a lot of time talking about anything and everything. Her views are a bit more liberal than mine, but not to such a degree that we would argue that much. We had a few debates about politics and found that we both could understand and respect each other's view. I also found out that she's Catholic too, even though neither of us practices all that much. We went to Mass together one Sunday a month for confession and communion, and that was it. But this morning, We had other things to discuss besides religion and politics. Okay, baby, I said, grinning after we'd finished showering. What ideas did you have for our new business? Well, for starters, I'd like to hire you for the firm and have you available to help clients. Maggie handles divorces, as you know, so she would definitely need your talents for nasty divorces like the one that just finished between William and Candace. Shelley helps her out, but also works personal injury cases on her own. I'm going to be much more selective about who I take on as clients now, thanks to Gordon. So yes, I think you'll have enough work to keep you busy. You'd get 1/3 of our normal fees as payment. You'd basically be a bodyguard private investigator. So, what do you think, baby? She said, making a compelling case. It definitely sounded interesting. I thought about everything she'd said for a moment. Well, as long as nobody wants to use me for assassinations or thug work, I don't see any problem with that, I said with a shrug. What? You don't like killing people? She chided with a loving smirk. You already know the answer to that, sweetheart, I smirked back. I'd killed before, in the line of duty, but it wasn't my favorite pastime. So, she asked with a raised eyebrow. Oh, I was definitely going to take my girlfriend's job offer. So, I'll do it, I shrugged and smiled. Woohoo! She woohooed with a big grin. The rest of the morning was spent at her office, where she told Maggie and Shelley about what my job would be with the firm, and how I would be available for any cases for which they needed me. Life went on. Tabby and I grew even closer in the following weeks, if that was possible. William kept in touch, and we sometimes went to his house for dinner. We found out that Candace had left town, moving in with her sister up in Santa Clarita. The supervised visitation was going well. She would come down every other weekend to try and mend her relationship with her children. While they were cold to her at first, they eventually realized that she had changed a lot since Kevin's testimony about what he'd witnessed. That had been the wake-up call she'd needed, but it had come too late to save her marriage. While she would always be their mother, there would never be quite the same level of love in their hearts for her as they had once had. While William was relating the tale, Tabby squeezed my hand tightly, giving me a look that spoke volumes about her own values and how she wouldn't ever do what Candace had done. While Gordon wasn't mentioned much, we never lost sight of the fact that he was still out there somewhere. He had very limited resources now, but he was still dangerous. I'd learned a lot about him over the months since this whole mess had started. When he wanted to be, he was very charismatic. He could convince a nun to have sex, is the way that Candace had described him. Yes, I got a chance to talk with Candace about the whole mess and how it had started. I wanted to know how she had fallen for the a-hole, to the point where she was willing to go along with anything he wanted, including making William a knowing but unwilling cuck. She said she'd met him at a fundraiser she'd gone to with William, and William confirmed that. Up until then, she had loved and respected William as a man and a husband, but after Gordon started whispering in her ear that her husband didn't deserve her, and that he was more than man enough to take care of her, she had started to waver. The seduction had been slow and deliberate. It had taken 2 months for him to wear down her resistance. It had started innocently enough. It always does, right? She had given him her cell number to ostensibly coordinate for the next big charity fundraiser. Well, he had started with flirting texts and pics. William had to leave the room at that, as he didn't want to be reminded of the whole mess. Hell, he only stayed civil with her due to the fact that they had 2 kids together. Anyway, she related how it had all been just innocent flirting, up to the point where it had stopped being innocent. She admitted that Gordon had become angry after he kissed her for the first time, and she pushed him away. She told him it was wrong, that she loved William, and Gordon had glared at her like he was going to hit her. He had apologized immediately for getting angry, and had smooth-talked his way into her forgiving him. But then he touched her again, and she had given in. He was just so handsome and so manly that she couldn't resist him anymore. After seeing him almost strike Tabby, I believed he probably would have hit Candace if she hadn't given in to him. After that first time, it snowballed quickly out of control. It was only 2 weeks after that first time that Gordon wanted her to make William a knowing cuck. Whether or not he was willing didn't matter to Gordy boy. It was a power trip for Gordy, and as it turned out, Candace too. She had discovered a cruel streak in her that she found both disconcerting and liberating at the same time. The only line she wouldn't cross had to deal with her kids. Oh, she was fine with the using the kids as leverage to keep William from divorcing her plot, but she steadfastly refused to let Gordon meet the kids and try to subvert them away from William. She was adamant about that, but Gordon had never given up on it. She said that William was their father, and Gordon wasn't. He also kept pressuring her to divorce William, and she was starting to lean that way when it all finally blew up in their faces. That was when William hired me, just in case you forgot. She realized now that she had lost herself in the affair. She also realized that she had lost much more than just herself. She'd lost her husband and children too. William was never going to take her back, no matter what she said or did. The hell she put him through for over a year had totally killed what love he'd had for her. Kevin and Tara had lost all respect for their mom, and even though they were being cordial to her again, it was questionable whether or not they would ever fully love and respect her again after what she'd done to their father. William, for his part, had tried to act immediately after Candace had delivered her original ultimatum. He had consulted with some of the best divorce lawyers in the state and had been told the same thing by all of them. Unless she puts the children in an illegal or blatantly immoral situation and you have rock-solid proof of that, or unless she's in prison, she stands a 99% chance of getting full custody in the divorce. Thus had begun his mission to find a PI that would help him out. For some reason, they had all balked at the illegal means they thought they would have to use. Only one would help, and all he did was gather the evidence of the adultery itself. Video, still picture, and audio proof that Candace and Gordon were having the affair. When William had shown copies of the pics to Candace, she and Gordon had gone ballistic on him. Candace said that if he sent those to her parents as he had threatened, he would never see his kids again. Gordon had threatened to kill him outright. So William had felt trapped. He never gave up, though. He even considered hiring more militant help, but finally discarded that idea. He didn't want to kill anyone, no matter how much Candace and Gordon might have deserved it. And so it was. When she'd recounted her fall from grace, Candace's tears had been real. She truly regretted her decisions during the whole mess and was now in counseling. As far as William was concerned, however, he already told me that hell would have a hockey team before he took her back. I had to chuckle at that. Just when you thought it was safe to go back in the water. Oh wait, this isn't Jaws 2. But something similar ran through my head after the feces hit the rotating oscillator. 2 months after the divorce was final was when shit happened on a monumental scale. No, Candace had nothing to do with it. She really was repentant over what she'd done. No, this involved the MIA a-hole, Gordon Smith. I'd started helping out with cases at the firm, working for Maggie, mostly. Divorce cases are almost always trench warfare-style dirty fighting. Granted, my first case for her was fairly straightforward. Get the proof that a wayward hubby was cheating on his bride. That was easy. The next case, however, had me up in Ventura for a bit as the a-hole in that case had a mistress up there, and that took me away from Tabby for a couple days. I had just called and talked to Tabby, telling her that I had all the intel on the a-hole and was about to head back down to LA. She said that she would tell Maggie. 20 minutes after we said our I love yous and hung up, Maggie was calling me back. I was driving, so I hit the Bluetooth earpiece and smiled. I take it that Tabby told you? I chuckled. We got the pig dead to rights. David, you need to get down here as fast as you can, she said, sniffling. She had obviously been crying, and that set the hairs on the back of my neck on end. I just cleared Santa Barbara and was heading towards I-5. I sobered quickly as her words sank in. What happened? Is Tabby okay? I asked as calmly as possible, even though I had a sinking feeling in my gut. I hope she will be. She and Shelley were attacked in the parking lot as they left, and when I heard what was happening, I called 911. They're both in the hospital and in pretty bad shape. I'm there too, so come straight here when you get back, okay? She was barely holding together. Did you see who did it? I asked, but I already had a pretty good idea of who had done it. I think so, but I'm not sure. He had a hoodie on, but he was a really big guy. He attacked them with a baseball bat, she exclaimed angrily. Her tears had been replaced by anger. I'd seen her angry before, and I thanked God she wasn't mad at me. Gordon, I said coldly. It wasn't a question. He was a big guy, and he had the most motive. I cursed myself for not taking more precautions. It was always in the back of my mind that he might try something like this against Tabby or William, maybe even against me. But then, he already knew that I could take him. So he did the cowardly thing and went after the ones who he knew he could beat. His frozen accounts assured that he wouldn't have the funds to hire any muscle. That wouldn't surprise me. That son of a witch has gone way too far. This time, she almost shouted. I agree. I'm on the way, Maggie. Which hospital are you all at? Mercy, and I'm in the ICU waiting room. They got hurt badly, Deck. Okay, then I'll be there in about a half hour, I said. After I check in, I'll go to the firm and look at the security footage. Yes, that was one precaution that might just pay off. I talked Tabby into getting several security cameras set up in the parking lot of their little law firm. I was just hoping that it would help. Good idea. Just please hurry. They just took Shelley into surgery. I'll be there ASAP, I said. See you when I get there. With those words, I ended the call and put the pedal to the floor. 135 horses roared into action as my speedometer hit 100 miles per hour and kept on going. Sure enough, I was there in a little under half an hour. I had gotten extremely lucky in that the California Highway Patrol hadn't been looking to fill their monthly quotas. Hell, I hadn't seen a chipper during the whole drive. When I got there, Maggie met me in the ICU waiting room and gave me a sitrep as she hugged me. Deck, Tabby is in room 207, but Shelly is still in surgery. She took some serious head trauma. Damn it, I said with a grimace. Head injuries are bad in any estimation. A baseball bat to the head could kill someone. Will she be okay? I hope so, Han, she replied with a grimace of her own. How about Tabby? Is she okay? I asked hopefully. She got banged up pretty good. Her ribs are bruised, but the a-hole only got one shot in on her before Shelly started hitting him. Thank God for Shelly, I said quietly. Now, I need to go see Tabby. 207, right? Yeah, she was asleep last time I was up there. Thanks, Maggie. I just have to see if she's okay. Then I'm going to check the security footage at the firm. I need to see it for myself. I understand, Deck. With that, I went up to the second floor and quickly found 207. Her door was open, and she was awake and staring out the window. Hey, beautiful. I got here as fast as I could, I said as she turned to look at me. She smiled and a few tears ran down her face as she looked at me. I crossed the room and sat on the edge of her bed as I leaned down to hold her. Her arms came up and around my neck, and we held each other tightly. Thank God you're here, baby, she sobbed into my shoulder. I wish I could have been there when it happened, honey, I said, my heart filled with love for her and regret that I had been so far away. I could have stopped it if I'd been there, damn it. Don't worry about that, Deck, she said into my chest. I held her close, stroking her hair and kissing the top of her head. She was clinging to me for dear life. Sweetheart, what happened? I already talked to Maggie, but she didn't see the whole thing. Tabby took a minute to calm herself, but never released her hold on me as we held each other close. She took a deep, shuddering breath, then started her account. Well, Shelly and I were leaving work, and we were going to go to a bar to have a couple drinks. We were going to call you and Maggie when we decided which bar we were going to, but it never got that far. I was unlocking the door to my car when Shelly yelled, and I felt something hit me in the ribs. It hurt like hell, baby. She started sobbing again, and all I could do was hold her close and stroke her hair and back while she cried. When she had recovered a bit, she continued. So after he hit me a couple times, Shelly was there beating the living shit out of the a-hole. She hit him with her purse, and you know how heavy that thing is. She chuckled a bit, but winced from the pain in her sides. Yeah, I know. I smiled sadly, then kissed her on the forehead. Go on, sweetheart. So he stopped hitting me and turned that bat on her. I was getting up and screaming when Maggie ran out with her phone and called 911. When the a-hole saw her, he ran and jumped on a motorcycle. Then he peeled out of there like a bat out of hell. Did you get a look at his face? I asked in a low tone. I could feel her shaking her head against my chest. No, baby, but I think I know who it was. He didn't say a word, but grunted a few times when Shelly hit him. God, he beat her so badly. She burst into tears again, and I held her close. It was the only thing I could do at that moment in time. When she'd finally calmed down, I pulled back a bit and looked into her lovely dark brown eyes. Sweetheart, I need to go check the security footage from the firm. I'll be back as soon as I know anything, okay? She sniffled. Okay, baby. I love you. And please be careful. Remember, if it's him, please don't kill him. I remembered my promise to her. I promised not to kill him. I promised again with a wry smile. No, I wouldn't kill him. I'd just make him wish he'd never been born. You just rest and get better. I love you, Tabby. Love you too, Deck, she replied with a beautiful smile. When I checked the DVD-RW at the firm, I wasn't able to make out the attacker's face under the hoodie, either. If anyone had seen his face, it would have to be Shelly, and last I heard, she was still in surgery. However, when he jumped on the crotch rocket to make his getaway, a Suzuki Samurai, no less, I was able to pause it and get the license plate number. I did a quick check online, and found it registered to a Greg Jones, complete with address. An alias? That seemed to be the safe bet. Just to make sure, though, I called Maggie. Hey, Deck. Tabby told me about you checking the DVR at the firm. Did you get anything? She asked as she answered her phone. As a matter of fact, yes. I think. Anyway, did you, Shelly, or Tabby ever work a case involving a man named Greg Jones? Not that I know of. I'll ask Tabby in a few. I'm outside smoking right now. Yes, I know it's a nasty habit, but I'm scared and stressed out right now. Not judging you, Maggie, I said. Tell you what, you talk to Tabby, and I'll call you back in an hour or two, okay? Okay, what are you going to do? She asked with some trepidation in her voice. I'm going to declare war. With those words, I ended the call and turned my phone off. At that point, I didn't even care if it was Gordy the Gimp or not. The shit stain had just earned himself a trip to the Hurt Locker. I decided to leave my Camaro at home for this one. I grabbed my '71 Harley Sportster instead and headed over to the a-hole's place of residence. When I got to the condo, I saw the electric blue Suzuki Samurai parked in the spot in front of his place, so I figured he had to be home. I closed my eyes for a moment, said a silent prayer, and walked up to the door. I rang the doorbell and made sure that my helmet visor was down so he couldn't make out my features. Who is it? He asked from inside the house. Son of a witch. It was a-hole number 1. I raised my voice an octave when I answered. I was wondering how much you'd be willing to sell that Samurai for, man. It's not for sale, he semi-shouted from inside. He hadn't opened the door yet and wasn't likely to. I'll give you 10 grand for it, I said, still raising the timbre of my voice to mask it. I always liked them, and they discontinued that model. It was silent for a moment. Then I heard, okay, let's talk. Greed will win out, folks. The dump truck opened the door for me. Okay, that's a bit of a misnomer. I heard him throw the deadbolt back and start to open it when I rushed him backward into his apartment. I unloaded on him. When he fell backwards onto his butt, I kicked the door shut behind me. I didn't say another word as I just stood there, my face concealed by the helmet's visor. Hey man, it wasn't me. Whatever you think happened, it wasn't me, okay? He lied through his teeth when I finally let up on him. He was still wearing the red hoodie that Maggie had described. The hood was now back, though. I could see the bruise spreading across his cheek, probably from when Shelley had hit him with her purse. My only answer was physical, as I kicked him hard in the balls, then proceeded to deconstruct him one bone at a time. Steel-toed boots work wonders on shins and kneecaps. I made damn sure that he never lost consciousness while I was beating the living shit out of him. He tried to fight back at first, but that just made me hit him harder. When I was done, and he was a broken wreck, I just stood there watching him drifting in and out of consciousness. I still hadn't said a word since I'd barged into his house. I picked him up and pulled his face close to the dark, tinted visor. Not that he could see me through his swollen shut eyes. Then, when I was convinced that he'd lost consciousness, I dropped him like a bad habit. Gordy the punk ass, which didn't look anything like when I'd first arrived. I took one last long look at him as he lay on the floor, a shadow of his former self. Then I turned without a word and left. See, people like Gordon Smith only understand one thing: violence. I figured some good old-fashioned wall-to-wall counseling had been in order to show him what it was like to be beaten half to death while defenseless. It was an object lesson for him, more than anything else. Screw it. Who am I kidding here? Damn it, that had felt good. I stopped at a corner store and bought a throwaway cell phone, then used the free minutes it came with to call 911 and report that Gordon Smith was alive and not so well. After giving the nice 911 operator lady his address, I ended the call, stomped on the phone, then removed the SD card. I threw the phone into the dumpster behind the Quickie Mart, and that was that. Then I headed back and parked my Sportster someplace where I could watch the festivities as the cops and EMTs arrived. When I turned my BlackBerry back on, I had 20 text messages from Maggie and just as many from Tabby. I think I'm in trouble now, I said to myself with a wry smile as I called Tabby first. Baby, are you okay? She asked in a worried tone. I'm fine, sweetheart, I answered evenly as I watched the cops arrive at Gordon's place. I found out where Gordon was living under an alias and called the cops on him. They just got here and are going inside right now. Now, what aren't you telling me? She asked, seeing right through me. Well, I might have subdued Gordon for the cops before they arrived, I said in a light, innocent tone of voice. I kept my promise, though. He'll live. Oh my God, baby, she exclaimed. Please tell me he can't identify you. No. I was wearing my helmet with the dark tinted visor down while giving him the wall-to-wall counseling session. She laughed briefly, then gasped. Don't make me laugh, baby. Sorry, sweetheart, I grimaced. Look, I'll be there shortly. I need to get changed out of these clothes first, though. I understand, boo. Hurry up and get here, okay? I will. I love you. Love you too, honey. With that, we ended the call and I rode to my apartment to get changed. Old Gordy's blood was still on my boots and jeans. Once the clothes were burned and I'd changed into clean clothes, I got in my Camaro and headed back to the hospital. When I got back to the hospital, I sat with Tabby and Maggie in Tabby's room while we waited on news of Shelley. The mood was somber and filled with tension. Tabby held my hand like her life depended on it with our fingers interlaced, and Maggie sat beside me, saying quiet prayers for Shelley. Finally, 4 hours after the surgery had started, the doctor came into the room to let us know the situation. Since Shelley had no family after her parents and older brother had died, Maggie and Tabby were listed at her next of kin. That doesn't mean that they only get notified in case of her death or serious injury. That also means that legally, they are as close to family as possible without blood relation or adoption. Maggie? Tabitha? He asked. At their nods, he continued. Shelley is out of surgery and recovering in the critical care ward. She still has a severe concussion and had swelling in her brain from the assault. Also, her skull was fractured. However, we managed to get the swelling down and stabilized. She's now in a medically induced coma to help in the healing process. How quickly she gets better is up to her, but we'll have to keep her admitted for the duration. He paused for a moment, looking down, then back up at us after gathering his thoughts. It's still touch and go right now, but we will be monitoring her closely for any changes in her condition. I'm sorry I don't have better news for you, but so far, she's alive and hopefully recovering. Thank you, doctor, Maggie said, even as tears threatened to fall. He nodded, gave us a reassuring smile, and left the room. Once he was gone, Maggie looked at me with fire in her eyes. I hope you messed him up beyond all repair, Deck. He won't be hurting anyone else for a very long time, if ever. I nodded. Good. But I swear to God if she dies, I'll finish the job on him myself, she said grimly. I'll be right there with you, sister, Tabby confirmed. With the way they were talking, I don't think they would have objected all that much if I'd broken my promise, as I had been tempted to. And all this after you made me promise not to kill him, I said wryly to Tabby. Well, she's our sister, and we reserve the right to change our minds, Tabby said with a sage nod, lightening the mood a bit as Maggie and I chuckled at her statement. Oh, and if the cops come after you, Deck, you were with us all day. We talked about it while you were gone earlier. They know that you have beef with Gordon from what happened before at William's place. We'll alibi you if you need it, Maggie smiled. Thanks, Maggie, I said. And thanks, baby girl, I said as I leaned in and kissed Tabby. Anytime, honey, Tabby said as she returned my kiss. We talked for a while, keeping the conversation as light as possible. Tabby was still on meds for the pain in her ribs, mostly bruised, but with a couple of hairline fractures here and there. It would be a while before she would be up and moving again without pain. Visiting hours were up shortly after that, and Maggie and I had to leave. The doctor came in and pronounced that Tabby could go home tomorrow, so I confirmed that I'd pick her up in the morning. When I got to our place that night, I was met by the cops, who had been waiting on me. More specifically, 2 of the LAPD's finest defective detectives. Mr. Shepard, the first one asked. He looked to be about 100 pounds, overweight with a gut that entered the room about 5 seconds before the rest of him. His partner wasn't much better. That's me. What can I do for you, officer? I asked with barely masked disgust. I pretty much knew why they were here, but then again, I could have been wrong. I'm Detective Rogers, and this is Detective Hightower. We'd like to ask you a few questions downtown. I don't think so, I replied evenly. Either ask them here, or not at all. They looked at each other, then the spokesman, Rogers, said, Okay, may we come in? No, right here is fine. You still haven't told me what this is about. Well, an anonymous tip earlier today let us know where to find Gordon Smith. That's good news. He tried to have my former employer killed, I said with a nod and a smile. Well, when he was found, he'd been beaten pretty badly. Would you know anything about that? Can't say that I do, but if you find out who did it, let me know so I can buy him or her a beer, I shrugged. Mr. Shepard, would you please accompany us to the station so we can talk more candidly? Asked Rogers. Am I under arrest? I asked back with a raised eyebrow. Can you account for your whereabouts from 6 p.m. until 7 p.m. this evening? He asked back at me. Dumbass probably had to aim blind while pissing. Look, I was with my girlfriend and her business partner at the hospital. My lady and another business partner of hers were attacked in the parking lot of their law firm, so that's where I was from the time I got back to town from Ventura at about 6 p.m. I gave him my statement in an even tone of voice. Talk to Maggie Keller or Tabitha Williams. They can vouch for my whereabouts. We'll do that, Mr. Shepard, Rotund One said. Then he gave me the ever-popular, don't leave town shtick. Wouldn't dream of it, officer, I replied with a smile. Maggie and Tabby were as good as their word. He alibied me for the hour I was gone from the hospital to take care of the business with a-hole. After that, the cops pretty much gave up, since Gordon was already a known a-hole. Quite a few of them, from what I heard through Tabby and her grapevine of contacts in the LAPD, didn't give much of a rat's shit about who had messed Gordy Boy up. The more important thing was that he was now in custody. That was okay with us. The morning after the attack, I went and picked up Tabby from the hospital. She was moving kind of slow from the damage to her ribs, but otherwise was in a good mood. It was 2 more weeks before Shelley woke up from her coma. She, thankfully, didn't remember much, but she did remember the face under the hoodie, and that was enough to get Gordon Smith charged with attempted murder and assault with a deadly weapon, 2 counts each. Those, added to his earlier charge of conspiracy to commit murder by hiring the street thugs, pretty much guaranteed that Gordon wouldn't be seeing the light of day for a very long time. The surveillance DVD was subpoenaed by the DA. That, along with Shelley's testimony and the fact that he was still wearing the red hoodie when the cops and EMTs took him away, was more than enough to convict him. Not even his high-priced shark could get him off when all the evidence was stacked against him. For his conspiracy to commit murder trial, his hired goons were the star witnesses against him. They had been given a deal to cooperate for reduced sentences. After the dust had settled, Gordy the Gimp was sentenced to 25 to life in Folsom. Shelley was still recovering slowly, and Tabby, Maggie, and I were there for her every step of the way. When she finally told us to stop hovering and let her recover in peace, we told her to call us if she needed us. She'd said it with a smile, but we could tell that she wanted to do things for herself, too. So, what are we going to do next week, baby? All my cases are done, and Maggie said that Shelley needs to get her cases taken care of, too. It had been 6 months since the attack by Gordy Boy, and everything was pretty much back to normal at home and at work. We made love, or screwed as often as we could, with our schedules. We'd been busy for those 6 months with different cases, but now it looked as if we'd finally have some quality time together. How about you come up to Santa Barbara with me and meet my family? I asked with a smile. We'd been planning to do that anyway, before the shit had hit the fan. Tabby smiled and plopped her round full booty down on my lap. I think I'd like that, boo. I love my girlfriend. Dear listeners, please share your thoughts in the comments section below and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.